while you're in the middle of telling me about how the guy's buried in his father.
Well,
You would be upset.
I think the difference would be if we had a comedian performing on television, so that there was a delay,
Mm,
so that your timing was off, so
mm,
that I would start not knowing you had already started.
mm. That was all gibberish to me.
Hmm.
Our
Just imagine a family Zoom call where your mom really can't figure out where the microphone is.
Did you know I haven't done any of those? I have not done a single family Zoom. I've called my parents now and again, but Rosa Zooms with her parents every fucking day.
Every Wednesday for me.
Yes, we are not a Zoom family. We have a group chat. We're also a divorced family, so
You think
You have
that's a
to upgrade
symptom of
for
something
that.
deeper?
yeah, probably we're all sick of each other.
Okay.
Uh, what's your deal today, Eli?
Me? My deal? I just want to go back to playing Cyberpunk.
Oh, please. We have to get through this first. Folks, our second special guest today, you might know him from his appearance on the FX series Louie. Please welcome to the show, Mike Kaplan.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You were
as
on
always.
it. You can't deny.
I do not deny it. In fact, I'll add that I appeared in one episode, and then in another episode, my name was referenced, even though I was not in the episode.
Wow,
Really made a mark on his life.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, there's an episode where he's like picked up at the airport by a guy who has picked up lots of other comedians, and Louis doesn't want to talk to the guy, but the guy's like,
Right,
Bill
yeah.
Burr talked to me, Mike Kaplan talked to me, something like that.
Huh.
Do you talk to your drivers?
I think I
You and
let
earbuds
them.
guy.
I know that some drivers want to talk and some drivers
Mhm.
don't want to talk, so I do my best to meet them at their level.
I put my earbuds in, and then I bring a second pair of earbuds that I put in their ears, just to be like,
Danny,
just don't even
Do
try
you
it.
hear
do you-
what I
how do you do
hear?
it? I
Was- I
That's
invest in
funny.
a lot of I don't take the headphones, but I say this is a gift to you. Instead of a tip, you get a pair of airplane headphones.
You have a sponsorship? Oh, it's from Airplanes.
That's
Okay,
from
that makes
Airplanes,
sense.
yeah, it's
Sponsored
Delta
by
Bird.
Bose.
Danny,
Yes.
can I say a thing real quick before we keep talking? Before I keep talking, I want to say one thing. I really liked that when you held up your drink and you said, "I've had this much," and then a few seconds later you were like, "I've had the
Yeah.
part that's not
Had
that I haven't.
this.
I had the part at the top. I haven't drunk all of the beer that's in the glass, and then baby birded it back into the glass."
What kind of Narragansett are you drinking, Mike? That's green.
This is, it's a St. Patrick's Day, obviously.
It's a stout.
It's the Shrek milkshake
every day is
from
St.
Burger King.
Patrick's Day when you drink green juice.
Hmm.
Yeah, you wouldn't like me when I'm green juice.
And green juice. Yeah.
Was that the episode where? No, I'm not going to say it. Please continue. You have been introduced, and you're allowed to talk.
Oh,
Not you, Rick.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
God.
I was just gonna say this pretty well sets up the theme for the entire episode.
Which is?
It seems to be divergent tangents and the overall tone of the podcast.
Again,
I
gibberish.
can't argue with that.
I like it.
Was that the episode where the Louis episode that you were referenced in? Was that the one where what's his face? Jim Florentine dies? Was it
I
that
don't
episode?
remember.
Because he's also a comic sharing a house with him, and they drink too much, and Louis is throwing up in the toilet while Jim Florentine needs to take a shit, probably much like Eli did. And Jim Florentine tries to do an upper decker, and he falls and hits his head and bleeds out.
You know-
and I think that's how the whole show ends. That might
I
be
was
the last
thinking
episode
about,
of the last season.
I was thinking about the one with Robin Williams, which is a great little standalone thing.
Oh, where they all go to the funeral of the guy.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, because I was thinking, one of my best Christmases ever was the year DJ Hazard and I spent Christmas Eve at the Naked Eye Strip Club.
How
What
was
was
their
it?
buffet?
What was so
It
good
was
about the
all
strip
just
club?
nice friends, and everyone was in a terrific mood, and it was sort of this understanding of we're all here because this is the only place that provides that little piece of loneliness that we miss in the rest of our lives. It was really Really touching. I'm gonna have to write something.
Okay, good. What was the place called?
The Naked Eye.
That's not what should be naked.
Oh, you should look up the logo was a pair of legs with an eye in the middle.
Oh, I thought it was like part of the Hungry Eye franchise, like
That was
the Hungry
yeah.
Eye, the Naked Eye, the Thirsty Eye.
Well, that's a little off-putting. I looked up the Naked Eye Strip Club on Google, and the first thing that came up was Combat Zone Boston.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
That's what they called
it was the main place right in the middle of the combat zone.
Good old Boston lore.
They have T-shirts.
I want
for
to keep
sale.
talking about Louis. No, I don't.
Okay.
Now, Mike, you normally we ask you to be on the show. We're not above begging. Oh God, get it away. Okay, there it is. You have
Just
the
right,
lock
just
and
had them
loaded.
locked. Yeah.
That's really impressive. You didn't
Ready
know
to
that they were-
go.
I mean, maybe you had somehow planned on bringing it up, but you didn't know that I was going to. Rick, kudos to you.
Wait, Danny,
And
you don't
never
pre.
let it be said that I don't give you kudos enough.
Wait, you
might
didn't
wanna let our
pre-plan that Louis
listeners know
C.K.
what you're
bit.
referring to.
Well,
Oh,
I'm trying to
yes.
get to it.
Okay.
Oh, what you were referring to now?
Either way.
For the audio listeners,
Rick held up a copy of Louis C.K.'s book and a copy of the Combat Zone book. Combat Zone, the book.
Wow, strip clubs
Two
have great
topics
marquees.
we talked about randomly, and he had the books ready, and so we were all very impressed. Now, Mike, normally we ask you to be on the podcast.
yes.
I view you as something of a crutch for me comedically. but this week was different. You actually emailed us with an agenda of your own asking to be on the podcast. Please take it away, sir.
I'm happy to do so. So, as you may know from conversing with me previously on this podcast, I think last time I was here, I think it was last time I was here, you're like, what can I do to get you, Mike, to listen to our podcast?
That's right. Rick
And
wanted to know.
because there's more podcasts than I think a person could listen to. And I love being on the podcast. I love all of you. And yet, up until very recently, I never listened to the podcast. It's like, I'm like the target market. I'm a comedian. I love the Comedy Studio. I have a great time with you and listening to you. And yet, what was it? I was like, but it still didn't. I'm like, maybe you should be giving relationship advice, because the one podcast that I do listen to the most regularly is Dan Savage's The Savage Lovecast.
I don't think you
I'm
said that.
Big fan. I also listen to Dear Prudence a good amount. I love
That's a
It's
song.
the
That's not a podcast.
Danny. It's also
That
a
is an old song.
okay. I thought it was. I get a lot of advice from it, so I love the genre
Sure.
of advice. But I guess so. Here's how we're framing this: is like,
Mhm.
Mike, I advise you to listen to this podcast, and I took it under advisement, and so I listened to I think what must have been last week's episode.
Mhm. With Mark Levy.
And I saw that Mark Levy, because last time we were on, we talked about Mark
Mhm.
Levy.
It's a real insular universe we
Yeah,
played.
I love it. Expanding, the comfort zone and the zone of sort of familiarity. Like, I wrote a joke recently about how Jesus said, "Love thy neighbor." And then politicians were like, all right, we got to gerrymander the neighborhood to see where we have to stop loving people. And I think that probably the idea of if you're a Jesus fan, he was probably not just speaking about your next door neighbor.
Mike, that actually reminds me of a story from my life. One Christmas, I was with my good friend DJ Hazard, and we went to the strip club. We went to the strip club called Love Thy Neighbor, and we had a really lovely time. And we met
Is
Robin
DJ
Williams.
short for? I always forget. Is it Danny Jokes? Because that's what just
It's
happened.
it's Daniel. It's Daniel Johnston.
Danny
He's
Jokes
still
Hazard.
alive in disguise.
So, I was excited to see. I was like, I've been, since we've been talking about it, and since I've been telling everyone else to listen to this podcast because I want them to, I'm like, I'm gonna take my own advice, and I listened to that episode. I was excited to see Mark Levy on because I think when I was previously on, I was like, you should have that guy on,
Mhm.
and you did, and it was nice and friendly, and I felt while I was listening, I was like, oh, there's a lot of things that I would. One thing that I wanted to speak to about that in particular, when you guys were talking about the the supportiveness of the Boston comedy scene and whether it makes it so that sometimes people don't get the competitive edge that they need if it were a harsher, more cutthroat environment that people need to thrive in. And it reminded me of like when I started, I felt like the comedy studio kvetch board was kind of like a harsh place. Like if you didn't know the people. If you were new, there were people who were there were people who were jokingly mean. There were people who were actually mean. And like it wasn't until you hung around enough that you got to really know the lay of the land and be like, oh, that person I ultimately developed the thick skin. It was sort of like a microcosm of what it would be out in the actual world of comedy when audiences might be
Yeah,
mean to
Eli,
you
my
or,
thoughts exactly.
or
Eli just did a
indifferent.
big yawn. Couldn't let that one go by.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Danny,
please continue.
thank you
It's
so much.
interesting.
But I developed a thick skin from the Comedy Studio kvetch board, and so you and your joke about yawning and being bored by what I'm saying can't bring me down.
Put it
but
on the bulletin board.
And I guess I don't know what Boston if it's much more supportive now than it used to be, but certainly I think it was enough. There was enough poison in the beautiful well water that we were all drinking from as I was coming up in the early to mid 2000s. That I mean, I'm okay. I think that, and I think that there still have been who has come out of Boston. There's been some great comedians coming out in the past. Like you can't know how it is now until you see the people who've started around now the past few years, 10 years later, and be like, oh, how did you develop over the course of 10 years, having started from the womb-like environment that the studio has always been. Like the studio has always
Very
been
feminine,
like
yes.
the shining star of warmth and welcomingness.
Maternal.
And yes, Danny, maternalness and femininity. I take
Wet
your
and
jokes
dark.
and I accept them.
Dripping from the ceiling at
so,
some point.
Here is
Oozing
the
slime.
reason specifically that I reached out, as you know, for your listeners. For our listeners, I feel some ownership here now. This podcast is mine.
We'll get into
And,
that. Okay, sure. Hey, we'd love to have you.
Part
of the Mikeaverse.
Yeah, we have an announcement to make.
The cinematic Mike Studio verse. On that episode with Mark Levy, who had kindly reviewed the Comedy Studio podcast, you also referenced someone who had not as kindly reviewed the Comedy Studio podcast, and he had reviewed my episode of it. It was a podcast called Muckville, I believe. Muckville review, and I listened to a little bit of Muckville. Where they had because on your
Which bit?
podcast,
Because it's a short podcast. So
Danny, that's not true. It's actually I think 4 hours long.
yeah, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah. In the grand scheme of the universe, yeah, it's not infinite for sure. It seemed it a little at the. I mean, I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just sort of zoomed through, found the part where briefly they started talking about the Comedy Studio podcast, and I'd been forewarned on your podcast that the critique was mainly of me.
Yes, this was Eli who brought this up.
I
It
did
was.
bring it up.
You did
Eli,
bring it up.
I
You're
did
the only
bring
one
it
who
up.
listened. Okay.
I was I listened to his podcast while I was
You're
working
a
out.
loyal fan, I've come to understand.
I've only listened to 2 episodes,
Well, that I mean, that
but
qualifies.
I think that might be loyalty
He's got like
for
6
Anthony.
of them.
So, the host of Muckville, I love the name. It's so evocative of Mudville, and which that's like the famous. Is it a poem about like the hero losing, and like it was a sad day in Muckville. Is that a thing?
No.
I know of a Dead
It
Cat
will be
Ricketti
tomorrow. It
song,
will be
No
after this
Joy
episode.
in Mudville.
Casey at the Bat. Casey at the Bat is the
But
story.
that's Mudville.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is it evokes it for me.
Okay.
Like so I think right now there is kind of no joy in Muckville. Like that as I understand here's my favorite thing, one of my favorite things about the Comedy Studio podcast, like before even listening to it, is the catchphrase, the only podcast. The slogan, the subtitle. It's beautiful.
Mr. Hatch.
My girlfriend
It's committee
Rini,
design.
Rini loves it so much. Whenever I'm telling anyone about about how the Comedy Studio podcast is the only podcast, she'll pop her head into the room and be like, "You can't name another one, can you? I dare you." A thing that Danny has said.
Try it. Name another podcast. You can't. I dare you.
We're talking about
Shout out
Muckville,
to
another
the-
podcast right now.
Nah, I don't believe you.
No,
But I
we're
guess
not.
it's more of a radio. It seems like it's more of a morning, noon, and night infinite radio show.
Mhm.
So my favorite thing about Muckville before I listened to it was its subtitle. So here's an analogy. The Comedy Studio podcast is to the only podcast, as Muckville is to a mean comedy podcast.
Yes.
That's their log line, tagline, log line. And so I listened, and the little bit that I listened to, the host was saying like mean things, but then every once in a while would be like, I don't mean these things. And he's like, I hope that at some point I get to a point where everybody understands that I don't mean the mean things, but for now I do have to tell people that I mean them. So I'm like, I like
I think
that.
he meant them.
I mean, it's hard.
I heard
it's
the
hard.
venom in his voice. I listened. Of course I did.
Here's the
Our
thing.
verdict is that he meant them.
Here is, yes, Rick.
I'm just I have not listened to it, so if you guys
Oh.
can fill in some of the
I think-
blanks.
So the critiques of me that I heard were, one, that I talked a lot.
Mhm.
Uh,
To be fair,
I that is 100% the truth.
Yeah, I think that's a critique, not a criticism.
Yeah. And then another one was that I come off sometimes as too guru-like, which that's also possible. I
the
endeavor
guy
to come
from
out
Despicable Me,
yes, Danny.
Guru? Steve Carell's character,
oh.
Guru.
I thought you were gonna
Oh,
reference
no.
the Love Guru with Mike Myers.
Oh yes. Oh, I think of you as something as a love guru. Yes, but no,
Thank
we're
you.
Steve Carell's Guru.
And it is not my intent to come off as too guru-like. If anything, I want to be exactly guru-like enough. But I mean, that's not my intent at all. My goal is to just share my experiences and help you all improve your horrible lives. That's all I want. So
I listen to these. I listen to every one of our podcasts. I like to listen back on like 1.5 speed.
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could record it that way too?
Just
That's
record,
fun,
just
Danny.
record life at one point in time.
Yeah, exactly. Like Steve, like Adam Sandler and Click. A movie that made me cry.
So I've never. Do you recommend I see it? I've never seen Click.
It's good.
You should
I
watch
liked
it.
It made me
Cool.
cry.
There's a lot more to
really-
it than just.
It really sweeps your legs out from under you.
I like Adam Sandler and I like crying. And a brief interlude. Can I tell you a quick story about
You
Adam
must.
Sandler?
Yes, please.
Please
Rick
do.
opened for him. Did you know?
Well, I must. Who? What?
Rick opened for him. Did you
Oh,
know?
I didn't know that. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
about it.
And yet
but-
here we are being mean to him, and this
Yeah.
guy opened for
Biggest
Adam
audience I
Sandler.
ever played to.
So back at the Lizard Lounge, Rick, you'll remember.
Oh, yes.
There was one time. This is the category of story. This is mainly a funny thing that I said once that I think is like a certain kind of joke that I think the host of Muckville would like. So I offer this to the host of Muckville. This story of a joke I once told. I believe it was like an American Idol style. I think it was before Last Comic Stand, or maybe it had just started, but it was a competition show. And there was 10 to 15 comedians on. Maybe I was one of the judges very early into comedy. It was like we were all just open micers, essentially. And so there was like a bunch of people performing and then a few people judging. And either in my set, if I was performing, or as the judge, I think I was talking to somebody after their set, and they said they had made a joke about how watching an Adam Sandler movie felt like masturbating with sandpaper. And I said, how do you know what it feels like to watch an Adam Sandler movie?
Very good.
You know,
misdirection.
Switcheroo.
Classic comedy technique.
Misdirection.
So here we are on the Muckville podcast. What was referenced that was of most interest to me was that the host had me on his previous podcast, or at least a previous podcast, and I was like, oh, And he was like, back then I didn't know what I was doing. I was a bumbling fool. Like, and so I went back through my records, and if I may share from
Please.
the record,
I've also
Yeah.
got the email.
I
Before
went.
you start,
Yes.
These are
is
your
there a
notes?
reason you haven't said his name yet?
Oh no, it's I mean,
Because
I already tagged him in the comments.
I don't mind. His name is Anthony. I don't know how to say his last name. I guess is it Massa?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Anthony Massa. Hello, Anthony. If you're listening, thank you for having me on your podcast 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, I believe in January of 2016, I was scheduled to and did headline Laugh Boston for the first time. I did a weekend there, and because of that, I was looking to, I actually had never headlined a week I feel like that was like a big comedy club in Boston. Like I'd been headlining for several years out on the road, but like Boston at the time, it only had like the Wilbur. Like I never headlined the old Comedy Connection. I did tape my special at the Wilbur, but that was like a special deal. But like getting to headline a full weekend at like Boston's Road Comedy Club,
Yeah.
like that, it was special. It meant something. And so I was doing I wanted to get a lot of people there. I wanted people to come to the shows. And so I went on to now I feel like the Comedy Studio Kvetch board was made extinct in a way by like Facebook groups. And so there was a Boston Comedians Facebook group. Maybe there still is.
There still is.
And I went on there and I wrote on October 30th, 2016. Oh, so I must have headlined in January 2017. So, hey, Boston comedians, this is Mike Kaplan. How are you? I'm doing a weekend of shows at Laugh Boston in January, and I want people to come to the shows. Do you have any ideas of ways to help make people come to shows? Podcasts, interviews, blogs, screaming? If you have thoughts, thanks for letting me know. I hope I'm using the internet right. I love you all. And then one of the people who wrote back was Anthony Massa, and he said, I have a podcast, man. And I said, happy to do your podcast. And he said, I'll inbox you, bud. And so here's what he wrote. He said, hey, man, it's Anthony from the Boston Comedians page. I actually also work at Laugh Boston in the kitchen. So when you're performing, I'll hook you up. My podcast is called, I want to save what the name is for a little bit. But it's on SoundCloud and iTunes. We usually have a couple segments and an interview. I try to keep it natural, fun. And I'd love to talk comedy with a professional comedian, being an up-and-comer myself. If you want we could do a phone interview, or you could come into the studio. We could pick you up if you wanted. Let me know your schedule, brother. Have a great day.
Brother.
Oh, yeah. So I wrote back, and there's some
Deep connection already.
some logistics. And then he says, oh, yeah, anytime is fine for me. We could do a certain day in December. We could do another the weekend before the show. I'll email you with details once I get back to the office. Can't wait to talk comedy with you, man. As a new comedian with an audience of mostly other new comics, it'll be a fun learning experience, which it's all like this. He said, Anthony Massa here. We spoke on Facebook earlier. I'm so amped that you're interested in guesting on my podcast, and I can't wait to talk comedy and plug your shows. As for January, I work at blah, blah, blah. It's great meeting you, Mike, and I can't wait to. It's just a bunch of,
Sure,
setting
of
up the
course.
dates.
Yeah, you're wonderful. We understand.
Yeah, it's great meeting you, Mike, and I can't wait to talk further. As an up-and-coming comic myself, it'll be awesome to learn about your experiences as a professional on the road. Thanks again for your interest in the name of the podcast now is The Weekly Love. Thanks for your interest in The Weekly Love family, and I'll talk to you as soon as possible. And I love it so much. Like this is exactly like that's a wonderful way to talk to a person. Any person, like regardless of whether you're an up and coming comedian, an older, more experienced comedian, a human being. And it's just so fascinating to me that now, 4 years later, he's like, oh,
Something has
God,
changed.
I'm embarrassed with who I was back then. Like the mean comedy podcast, Anthony Massa of Muckville, like looks back on who I was being nice to a person and thinking, what was I doing? Calling my show The Weekly Love. It's fascinating to me. It's like Breaking Bad.
Yeah, are you quoting? Do we have evidence of his regret?
It's in his podcast.
Oh,
was
he
his
said it
podcast,
on the
yes.
podcast where he was talking about us. There's a segment where he's like, "Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing back then. I was a bumbling idiot fool back
is
then in my
what's-
old podcast."
In wrestling, they call this a foot turn.
It seems like there's been a shift. Yes.
Like when
foot-
Hulk Hogan became a
then
villain.
He became a foot. They call it a foot turn in wrestling.
Wait, is it?
Mhm.
Is it a foot? That's the name of the villain that they call the
Mhm.
foot, not a part of the foot, just the whole foot.
No, I believe it's from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
The
oh,
foot.
right. Which the Foot Clan, of course,
Mhm.
named. Do you know this?
Yes,
That
it's because
the
Daredevil
acid-
is the hand.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yep, and Stick and Splinter.
Oh
It's
yeah.
all yep. So how did you feel hearing this about yourself, Mike? You of course have a thick skin, and you've ascended the spiritual realm so many times that such
And what-
earthly matters must not bother you.
Yeah, and once again, what were the actual criticisms he had of you?
Talks too much and too guru-like.
I believe "Won't Shut the Fuck Up" came up once or twice.
Yeah, I think talks too much. It covers that, Danny.
Well, I'm just trying to quote it for Rick. I don't want him to
Danny's
miss
just
anything.
paraphrasing in his own way.
It's not like he's known for a week that we would be talking about this podcast, and even said it in his email. Let's do some research.
Do you know? This is a funny thing. Like my grandmother, would swear and would send me like dirty emails, like jokes, email forwards of sexual jokes and things. And she would have told them to me in person, but my mother didn't like that. And so like my grandmother would say anything. My mom is like my mom loves Brian Regan's comedy. Like I wouldn't recommend
Got
to
COVID?
her.
Did you hear?
I did.
Brian
I did
Regan?
hear that.
Because he's
I-
touring indoors.
I hope
Sorry,
he's okay.
Brian.
He's the bravest
what
comedian alive
happens.
today.
You're right. He crossed
For
that
now,
picket line
and
of
hopefully,
his health.
hopefully for longer.
Yeah,
I
he'll
hope
be
he
fine. He's a younger guy. He'll be fine.
is he.
What? Brian?
I mean,
He'll be
Uh,
fine. He practices clean comedy, so he'll be.
Eli.
Yes.
That's funny.
So.
Hey, this
so-
is me to
I didn't know what I was doing. I was a bumbling idiot back when I did the Comedy Studio podcast.
Danny, did you have something?
Well, we can do it later.
Okay.
Well, there's some meat on this.
Saving the
bone.
best bit for last, Danny.
Yeah, as
So-
I
Yeah,
wanted to do.
Okay.
I started talking about my mom and my grandmother for this reason, that now my grandmother, who died earlier this year, my mom comes up in conversation a lot.
My
Whenever my
regrets.
mom tells me a story about my grandmother, if there was something that my grandmother said that my mom wouldn't say, like she will censor it, she won't say to me, like she said damn on the phone with me earlier, and she was like, but I didn't say that. I wouldn't say that. Like that's as far as she'll go. Like she told me that my grandmother identified as one of the first liberated women, but she's like, but she didn't use the word woman. And I was like, what word did she use? I'm like, did my grandmother say she was a liberated bitch? Like, I don't know exact. So my mom, I think of that now because that's what I'm doing now. I'm like, oh yeah, Anthony Massa might have said something like what you said, Danny, but what I heard was he talks too much a little.
How was your experience recording the Weekly Love with him?
I didn't go back and listen to it, but based on my guessing from the interactions that we had leading up to it, I'm sure it was a wonderful time.
Hmm.
I searched for it, and I feel like it might not be on the internet
I think it's
anymore.
been scrubbed. I think he hired some data scrubbing.
Well,
firm
let's find
to
out.
Remove all traces of it.
Did he hook you up with chicken fingers from the Laugh Boston Kitchen?
Yeah, with the vegan chicken fingers.
I don't think they had any, but I'm sure that whatever salad I wanted, he would have gotten for me. I bet it. I'm spreading the word. I have a friend who his uncle works helping people scrub their identities from the internet. And one of the ways that they do that is not to get rid of all the information, but to add too much information, make new profiles of different people who have the same name, where some of the information is correct and some of the information is incorrect. So eventually there's so much misinformation out there that it's impossible for anyone to know what the actual information is. So here, I'd like to begin a campaign to let everyone know the truth that Anthony Massa is trying to hide, that deep down, he's a nice person.
Hmm.
I have evidence. I mean, from my own memory, from my own email banks, I thank you, Anthony Massa. I'm grateful that you helped me get people to my shows at Laugh Boston. I sincerely appreciate you. But also,
Well, this is
to
a
an-
relief,
yeah.
to be honest, Mike, to hear this.
Oh,
yeah?
Because I read this email you sent, and I swear I could taste the vinegar in your piss. I thought you were going to come on and really let this guy have it. And I thought,
How do
that
you know
can't
what
be good
vinegar and piss taste
for
like?
Mike's? Because I've tried it both together and separate.
Oh,
Trying to
the
get the
Narragansett.
Adam Sandler movie out of the mouth, you know.
So I'm
So
glad to
Sandpaper.
hear that you are being nice about it.
well, here, thank you so much. To answer your question,
It's very inspiring.
ha ha ha.
Because
To
it's
answer
not
your
like
question-
you led us to believe that you would be mean, and maybe it would be entertaining podcast for once.
I'm sorry if you felt like I tricked you. I guess that was mean to you, so I am
Mhm.
being mean.
Yeah,
Does
so
that
foot-
does that help your podcast?
a
Is that
You're
classic
bullying
turn.
Danny.
Do you know I saw
No,
one time
chances are I don't.
I saw a prank TV show once, and like pranks are not my favorite.
Right.
But there was like celebrities were like one of the things was like a guy was hired to drive a van and he thought he was just getting a regular job, and then fake police pulled him over, and then they found like a giant amount of weed or some kind of drugs, fake drugs under his seat, and he thinks he's going to jail. Because he's the only one who doesn't know that he's not actually going to jail. He's like, I just got this truck, I just got this job, and I was like, they're just terrifying this guy, and that didn't seem what if I could have a show, I would have loved to make it so that then, as that's happening, the driver is in on it, but then the quote unquote real police show up, also pranksters, and they arrest the people who were playing the police for impersonating police officers, because that way, at least, I think if you agree to prank someone, to terrify someone, then if anyone's going to be pranked, that should be the person who is pranked. Somebody who's willing to do something. If you're like, wouldn't it be funny to be mean to a person? Yeah, it would. Well, then I'm going to be mean to you. And so I feel like here, I'm sorry that I tricked you, Danny, but it was really your own desire for meanness that now made it so that what I'm doing is mean.
You're right.
This is the
So you
guru-like
see it
part.
Hoisted
as-
by my own petard.
So you see it as he has developed, that he has regressed from being a good person to being a meaner person, and he sees it as himself growing from being a naive person into a more mean person.
I would say that overall, that is approximately so. I don't sincerely believe that there is a such thing as a good person or bad person, but I do think that like the things that he was doing and saying several years ago were ones that I would like encourage and advocate and amplify as much as possible. And here's the thing is like I think that what he's trying to do is like either some combination of like an Anthony Jeselnicki kind of thing, or
It's Massa. It's not Jesuit.
Well, I think
Oh,
that's
I'm-
a bad example. Just I really like Jeselnik. I think there's a lot more thought than.
Can I ask you something real quick, Rick? Did your microphone turn off or something? Your sound seems to have changed.
No, maybe I'm just leaning away. Is that better?
and
I don't know. Sorry to
Okay.
even bring it up.
so Anthony, I know that of course Anthony Jeselnik's comedy is like Anthony is a nice person. Anthony Jeselnik is like a kind person who has created a character and is then be the things that he says that are mean or offensive or dark or however you'd classify them. We clearly know that he doesn't wish those things. He's not endeavoring to hurt people's feelings. He's just like a master craftsman of these dark, weird jokes. And I do think that from the little that I heard of Muckville, I think that that's what a version of that is what this guy's trying to do. I mean, I can't say. I'm not inside. him.
He made a post on it. There's a whole group for Muckville where he posted that was the entire strategy.
To pretend to be mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To get
Well-
views. Yeah.
Well, there is that whole angle that Mike Birbiglia famously talks about Glenn Beck saying after an interview, going like, "Come on my show. This is just a character. This is entertainment." Or Jon Stewart saying, "Hey, this is just entertainment. This is don't take this too seriously. So there's definitely a strand among comedians of, yeah, I'm going to be Larry the Cable Guy. I'm going to be the most offensive guy because that's what gets ratings. But don't take it seriously. It's just a character.
Yeah.
Uh, here's the thing: is I agreed. I don't know if it's. I don't think that when Jon Stewart said, "Don't take," like, I'm but a clown. I feel like he was like, I'm a comedian. I'm not the news. The news is meant to do an important job, and like some of the things that he did so well. Like if he was saying like what I'm doing is important, then that would have, I think, taken some wind out of the sails of what he was actually doing, which was important. Like, you know, there are certain types of comedy, like your Daily shows, your George Carlins, your Lenny Bruce's, your Kamau Bell's. There is some speaking truth to power. Like the truth is important. Like it isn't. Like I don't.
But
think
Kamau
that
Bell
if
is the news now. He's not.
I mean,
It's
he
the
is on
news.
CNN.
Yeah.
Yep.
You either die comedian or you live long enough to become the news.
Now,
I
you
mean-
personally, Mike, how do
Yeah.
you feel about this? Because generally, I would see you as someone who's taken valid criticism to heart and made it constructive and used it. It seems like this struck you on more of a personal level than a creative critique
For sure.
level.
Well, let me. I will now. That is very thoughtful, Rick, and I'll answer that and Danny's question of how it made me feel. Which at first it didn't make me feel good. I will say, like, as much ascending as I strive to do, as much improving myself and not my goal is to. There's a thing that I just learned. Shanti Deva is a Buddhist prophet, I believe. I don't know how to describe, but Shanti Deva, a Buddhist celeb, I think they would say, and said something like, to get angry with a fool for being foolish would be like getting angry with a fire for burning. And I mean, sometimes if we get burned, we get mad. We're like, hey, don't, like
Yeah, I got a nasty one the other day.
Absolutely. And you were super mad at it, right? You punched it.
I punched the pot
fire.
with my arm.
What's your problem, fire?
And so like, I think there's the flip side in comedy. I feel like there's both the idea of like, I don't care what anyone thinks, which is necessary to write jokes and like start doing comedy. Like if you cared what everyone thinks, then after your first open mic, you'd be like, wow, everyone thinks I suck and should stop. And if you took that to heart, then that's why a lot of people don't do comedy, or some people stop doing comedy. But it isn't that you always, I mean, it's also important to listen to audiences, like certainly when you're starting out, and eventually when you're crafting jokes and deciding, what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. Like it's important to care what some people think. It's important to care what you think. It's important to care what some audiences think in some contexts. It's important to care if you care about like what other comedians who you respect or people you respect think.
Do you care what Anthony Massa thinks?
I mean, clearly I care enough.
We are here.
I reached out to you and we're talking about it. And so I want to. Do you know the Harry Shearer quote that I think he told Mark Maron that I always paraphrase it? He says something like, people get into comedy to control why people laugh at them.
Yeah.
And because like people are going to be laughing at you no matter what. So if you're like, yeah, give me, like, I want you to laugh at me. I'm, give it to me. And so I had this feeling, and like right now, like my goal is to feel like we are all human beings, and
all right, well, start there.
And I do believe, like, my girlfriend did introduce me to this a book, a spiritual text called A Course in Miracles, which shares the idea that everything that anyone does in life is either an offering of love or a call for love or some combination. And like offerings of love are pretty, you can spot those pretty easily. Be like, oh, that's a loving thing to do. But that anytime somebody is like legitimately like mean or harmful, like those are in some ways a call for love. Like the idea that, hurt people hurt people. And
I couldn't have said it better myself, Mike. Hurt people, and I wanted to bring this up then, unless you have a thought you'd like to finish.
I do want to finish one thing, which is
Well,
the idea
make
of like
it snappy.
if somebody like Glenn Beck is saying like I'm just doing a character, like if you're doing an asshole character, sometimes doing an asshole character can also be an asshole thing to do. Like imagine like if I'm just like an asshole to you and you're like, hey, that kind of hurt my feelings. Like, oh no, don't worry about it. I'm just being an asshole character. Like, well, my actual feelings are hurt. Like that is a thing that can happen if like Anthony Jeselnik is doing an asshole character all for people who want him to do that asshole character, and that's why they go and pay for his show. That is back to you, Danny.
Hurt people. It's an interesting thing to think about. Hurt people. Now, I heard this review of us, and I was hurt. I'll admit it. It hurt my feelings. He said my pink shirt looks stupid, and I thought that's not very fair.
But I see that you're wearing it again.
Well, I'm a brave boy. Now, one thing that was mentioned on this podcast is that everyone is mean to Rick. Rick was characterized as a harmless, autistic man who collects Johnny Carson suits because they anchor him to reality. And everyone in his life is mean to him.
Which is tenuous in itself.
Yes, well, we can talk about that on Mike's podcast.
Anchors me to a reality of 1978.
Mm-hmm. You're like a time-traveling man. Now, Rick, I yelled at you in the podcast. It was in jest, but you've had a droopy dog look on your face ever since, as if it really hurt you. You've been doing your best William Barr impression. And so I would like to put my cards on the table, facially, not in action, and say, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm actually not hurt. I am intrigued by the conversation.
Take it back.
And I have figured out recently that I have a resting apocalypse face.
You often bring out much concern in me on these podcasts. When I look at your face, I think Rick is not having fun. Rick is sad. I should stop being so mean to Rick.
Very thoughtfully engaged. I find the exchange of ideas and thoughts. Like I said, I see a real dichotomy with Mike's thinking of, I want you to be critical of me. I want to know the truth. Because I get that all the time. Comedians come up to me all the time saying, let me know what you really think. What do you really think? Give me, be brutal, be honest. Tell me what you really think. I'm like, well, you went a little long. Oh my God, what? Oh no.
How dare you?
Seeing someone this accomplished, someone who has had this much success that can fall back on and say, well, fuck you, I had a special.
You're talking about Mike?
Him still take this to heart from someone that isn't as nationally known as he. I find fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, Mike's got an Emmy, You'd think this wouldn't upset him as much.
Danny, that's actually not true, to be
you don't
clear.
You're sure you don't have an Emmy?
I think you have two parts of that slightly wrong.
I think you're confusing Jews.
Yeah.
Rick.
I think the point here is...
I love you, and I thank you for the input.
Can I say this?
I've changed my input settings to Rick.
Now we're all familiar with the idea of like roasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a comedy roast. Danny, I can see that the wheels are turning in your mind to make some kind of joke about how we
Whoville's greatest roast beast. We watched
thank
The Grinch the other night. Yes.
That makes sense.
Not very good, this new Grinch.
And so, Rick, I forget if we've talked about this specifically, but the thing that I think about roasts that like I had one on at the Boston Comedy Festival, like where I was roasted in I think 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I think Sean Sullivan was the roast master. He was so good at roast. He loved Don Rickles. He did so much research to find out. He like knew we'd known each other for years, but he did so much more research. And then, it was like Joe List and Tom Dustin and Dan Hershon and Shane Moss and maybe Aaron Judge. I forget who all it was, but it was like people who actually, we all knew each other and cared about each other. And that's like the main ingredient that's important, I think, for a roast joke or an insult joke or at all for mean comedy to be understood and taken like in the spirit that it's intended, ideally, is actual like love and care and mutual respect. Like you go into a roast with friends, hopefully, where you're like, okay, we love each other. That's the base of this. And now we're going to say the funniest, most horrific things that we can imagine because it's a game we're playing for everybody's enjoyment. Whereas on the Comedy Central roasts, sometimes they would have, comedians who had this in mind. And sometimes they would just have this celebrity weirdly here for, to get ratings, or, hey, why is this
Jewel.
person here?
Well, yeah, I think that changed when you had Schumer became a star off of her roast appearance, and then you had Chevy Chase, which was almost all Comedy Central people rather than Chevy Chase's friends. And I think that's where I stopped liking roasts. We had done a couple when the studio started, and they were a lot of fun, and it was terrific. At the same time, yeah, I just saw it become a writing exercise in meanness.
Right. And so that is exactly like you could do it, you have done it, and you don't want to do it. And so for somebody to say, I'm just doing a character, like nobody's just doing anything.
Mhm.
You're doing that character,
Nike
but
is.
also you're a real person who's choosing to spend your time writing one kind of joke. And again, like it's not to say that mean jokes, roast jokes, insult jokes, like there's people who are masterful at them, and I love them, and they're beautiful. Like Anthony's specials are like symphonies, that are all planned out and pristine.
I've been
And
watching
then-
some of his old shows when he had that talk show. Oh, that was so good.
But sometimes people watch
The symphony
you know,
offensive.
sometimes people watch an offensive symphony, and if you're newer in comedy, then you're like, oh yeah, I can do that, and they do their
Yeah.
impression of that, and their impression of that has the meanness aimed at people who don't know that they're joking, or that they don't know that haven't agreed. Like I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I always start with the classes we teach, which you are now enrolling at thecomedystudio.com.
Mhm.
That's one of the first questions I always ask is, who are your favorite comedians? Because when we start out, we're going to be doing a little bit of an impression. We think, oh, I want to be a comedian. That person is a comedian. I have to be like that.
for sure.
Mike, you wrote a review of us on iTunes, and there was something I
Ah.
noticed in there.
Oh yeah,
It was
what was
a
it?
kindly review. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you mentioned,
because Mike talks too much.
well,
I'm done. I'm done now. I'm taking. I will talk a little bit more about how I've taken to heart that I sometimes talk too much.
You've learned.
you
all
wrote
that.
what? Yes, please, Eli. You haven't said much. It's your turn.
Oh no, I was just appreciating the guru-like wisdom from Mike.
You're much nicer than Gru. I don't understand the comparison.
Danny.
He's a super villain.
Why are you doubling down on this
You
joke?
Wrote.
Daniel will
maybe
triple
this-
down on it if you give it the chance.
Maybe this will answer my question for me. In your review, you wrote, everyone on the podcast is some combination of funny and or nice. Now, the word or in there was really what tickled my tummy. What who's just nice on this podcast? Because here's the thing. You look at the famous comedian, we brought him up earlier, Josh Gondelman. What's the number one thing everyone says about Josh Gondelman?
They say he's
the
a nice guy.
nicest guy in comedy.
And
Which
that he'll
is-
be on the Comedy Studio
is-
Chosen Show December 24th.
That's right. You're
Me
getting
too.
so good at advertising, which is not what every comedian wants to hear is how nice this guy is. Now, here's the secret about Josh. Very, very mean, but the nice guy is a character.
It's
He's
a
also very funny, but that does not get brought up enough. Nice does. Now, when you wrote everyone is some combination of funny and or nice, what did you mean by that?
Great question. Here is
Mhm.
since you've asked.
Why don't you think Rick is very funny?
So I've here's the thing that was challenging about this for me, because I wanted
It's
the
a writing exercise to write a review
Yeah.
of our podcast.
and I wanted the things that I say to be true and nice.
Or nice?
But that's the thing.
Mm.
I've known Rick the longest. I wouldn't be a comedian without Rick. Rick is one of the first comedians I ever saw perform live when I was in college, when he and DJ came to
I'm
Brandeis.
getting
Like,
some sound from someone.
oh,
Eli, I believe, is there some sound bleeding through from you?
Yeah, no,
Shouldn't
that
be.
was me.
Rick, I did tell you not to put headphones on, so that is
No, my external speaker for some reason turned on.
100% my fault.
That's
Eli, I apologize for the false accusation.
That was neither funny nor nice.
haha.
You know what? You nailed it on the head, mister. Mike, please continue.
So I have a lot of experience knowing Rick and how funny and nice he is. I have Danny. You and I've known each other for the second longest amount of time, and so I have
Probably
also
more when you add up all the minutes.
Oh yeah, the times that we've spent in the same place, absolutely. Less time from the first point till now, but more time within that.
So
absolutely.
I think I win.
Yeah, you win in one way for sure. And Eli, I've only known more recently. I've spent the least time with him, and so here's what I didn't want to say. I didn't want to say, Danny, so funny. Came up with the tagline to the podcast that I tell people all the time. I love it. His comedy is wonderful. I've spent so much time with him. Rick, an amazing, the reason that I'm in comedy, who also doesn't always strive to just be funny on this podcast, but strives to have more of a through line to
we should
draw
talk about
people
that.
out more, emotionally, and just cares so much about comedy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be funny all the time, much as this sentence that I'm in isn't funny. But also, when he wants to, when he puts the work in to do the writing exercises, or even in the moment, he is funny. And then also, Eli's a guy I know for a little while who seems funny and nice too.
I would have liked that review.
I felt that I'll leave another review where I do exactly that. now that we've talked about it and Eli has consented to it, because
Consent given.
here's a joke that I used to do that I wouldn't do anymore to a good friend of mine in comedy who I won't name because it was just I feel like it was rude of me to do it and it hurt his feelings. But I'd be like, I would be hosting a show and I'd say, some of the comedians tonight are the best comedians that I know, the funniest comedians I know. And some of the comedians on the show are some of my best friends. And this next guy is one of my best friends. Please welcome. And so I feel like I didn't want to do that to Eli.
I've done that many, many times.
But yeah, so
Okay.
so that the point is that guy's review did briefly, in a way, hurt my feelings to the point that I did want to talk about it. But because I see him as, we are all, everybody in life, in my learning about Buddhism recently, sorry to sound too guru-like and talk too much. Look, do you want me to apologize more or talk less?
I was just thrown off by Rick answering the phone before muting his audio.
That's fun.
How can I not be mean to him? I mean, come on.
Well, that's the thing is he has now opted into that. He's here every week.
He's tricking me. He wants
He's
to
setting
present
you
himself
up.
as this fucking babe in the woods, doe-eyed little bitch, and everyone's just is so mean to him all the time. But what they don't know is that twice now in this podcast, he's answered his phone with his mic on.
I understand. So
Let him have it, Danny. Let him have it.
It's too easy for me not to pounce on.
So here's two things. Number one,
Yes.
in Buddhism, there's an assessment that every person, every sentient being, is striving to increase happiness and decrease suffering. We don't all know how to do it.
That's why
But
Marilyn Manson took his ribs out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Danny, it's good to have you here to add humor to my sincerity. Sincerely. I love you. And I
This
just
is our
wish you would love
second date,
yourself.
weirdo.
I
I
wish
love
you would love
myself.
yourself.
Oh, but I do. That's the problem. See, I have undergone a similar transformation as Anthony Massa. So 2016, you knew me. I mean, October 2016 was a dark, dark time. I did not love myself back then as much, and you were aware of it, and you love to make a big show of it. Now here we are, 4 years later, in 2020, and I love myself. I think I'm the greatest guy in town, the hottest chip off the old block. And it's made me come off as extremely unlikable. So in a sense, I see a certain kinship with Anthony Massa, host of the Muckville podcast. Get it wherever podcasts are sold. In that it's easy to undergo Rick, I muted you because you answered a phone call, so I cannot hear you. I can't hear you.
Ask him to unmute.
I'm gonna ask him to unmute. Because
Oh, yeah.
Do you see yourself as playing a character on this?
Oh yeah, the guy who has to keep the podcast going.
He just came to ask you that.
Meanly, I'll say it. I do trend towards mean sometimes because that's an easy thing to do. It's easy to keep the flow rolling when you're a little mean, especially when I'm with 3 people that I know and like, myself, Mike, and Eli.
It's those Gansets, man. Those Gansett lights make you all rowdy.
What?
The Gansett light unlocks a certain potential in me that
Release
I think
the
should
beast.
stay locked down for a bit longer.
All you got to do is drink this much of it, and
yeah, definitely.
goes
That's all you
off.
got to do.
Well, that's
oh
the thing
shit!
is-
It's a light beer. I barely feel it. I'm gonna go rent a scooter later, and drive around town. Eli, have we gotten any comments on the episode? Is Anthony listening? Because
He
I
is.
know that
He is.
What's that?
He
Is
is.
he?
Yeah, he's listening.
What's he got to say?
I said he's loving this.
I bet he is. What a treat this must be for him.
Well, that's the point of doing the characters, to get people talking about it.
Yeah, and we fell right into it. Mike, are you working with him? You sent me this email, and again, I tasted that piss in your vinegar, and I took a second sip to make sure. And I thought, great, but now I'm.
Are you still talking about Narragansett Light?
Have I been sabotaged? Yeah.
We also had comments from Doug Fitzgerald, who said hi to Mike.
Oh, hi.
Great.
And he asked if Glenn Beck is creating a character, should there be a disclaimer saying that to avoid confusion from the character, or would that ruin the whole illusion?
Oh, of course it would ruin the illusion.
If I may,
but maybe
I have
morally
two-
there should be.
2 more things. One specifically to this
It's
point.
not a 2 more.
Danny,
Right, Arnold?
I like you.
I stole that from someone.
I like you.
Oh, good.
So number one, maybe I've shared this with you before, but I saw when Stephen Colbert was doing his character named Stephen Colbert as the host of the Colbert Report. I saw him do an interview once, not on his show. Like, somebody was interviewing him, and the journalist interviewing him was saying something like, "Now, how do I know which Stephen I'm gonna get the answer from? Like, how do I know whether it's what you believe or what the character believes?" And Stephen Colbert, the real human being, says, "Well, just let me know who you want to answer, and I'll answer in that way, because my goal is not to trick people. I'm not trying to. I want people to know when I'm doing the character and when I'm letting people know my sincerely held views." And I think doing the Colbert Report, it was very clear that the character was a character, and it was satire, and it was planned and thought out and brilliant. And that's the thing, is, like, whatever you're doing, do it well enough that people know what you're doing, and not just, show people what you're doing. Don't just tell people what you're doing, because sometimes if you tell them and it's not what you're showing, then people might be like, "Oh, I think that when you say you're doing an asshole character, is it possible that you're just being an asshole if you're doing it to people who don't want to hear it?"
Yeah, but don't you want people to sort of buy into it? Don't you want them to not see the strings, to sort of be pulled into it?
Well,
I
I think Glenn Beck
are you when you
does.
meet an actor who plays one of your favorite roles and you realize, oh, they're not like that character at all. I wish I didn't know that.
Great question, Rick. I can't answer
That's
it
a
because
part of a
I
through
don't.
line.
I don't specifically play a character. Like, I'm endeavoring to be myself. Like, I think Lewis Black said once that, like, he doesn't yell all the time. Like, but that anger is a piece of, like, that's one aspect of himself that he amps up. But to answer your question, Stephen Colbert clearly did want people to know the difference. He didn't want people to confuse himself for the character.
I've been delving into that a lot lately in terms of stand-up as a character. Like, Amy Schumer has a very specific character. How do you define that? Like, we know a joke that fits into someone's persona, and it seems to be kind of an archetype with a specific weakness.
Great question, and I just want
It
to
wasn't a
clarify our
question.
terms briefly. Rick, you ask very good questions, and then you stop asking them, and then I answer them. I just want to make sure that a character is exists along a spectrum. Like, when we say doing a character, usually it means like being, portraying characteristics of somebody that we're not. Like, if Dan Whitney is like, I'm Larry the Cable Guy, like, it's not even the same name. It's, who knows how much similarity there is between one and the other now, but like, I imagine that Larry the Cable Guy isn't a rich guy, but Dan Whitney is a rich guy.
Clearly.
There's like some
Well,
very
he invented the cotton gin.
now
And he was an 80s comic.
Danny, Rick.
Whitney.
Danny Whitney. That's what I'm gonna start calling Larry the Cable Guy.
Yeah.
But the idea of having a persona, I think, is somewhere closer, like for somebody like Amy Schumer or like Louis Black or like Chris Rock. Like I heard Chris Rock on NPR years ago, and I didn't even recognize his voice until he said who his name was, because he wasn't using his onstage performance voice.
He's
like
got a Cockney accent in real life. Not a lot of people
Danny?
know that.
I saw an interview with Neil
I
Brennan.
took the
with
apples and
Chris Rock
pears to
that-
get to the studio.
He sounds like Queen Elizabeth.
Sorry,
Nick, you saw
please.
a Neil Brennan.
Oh, Neil Brennan interviewing Chris Rock, and it was really, really interesting because Brennan knows Rock well enough that he was really poking at some early childhood trauma and such, and you could tell Rock really didn't want to go there, but it was Brennan, so he kind of did. It was
I
really
don't like
interesting.
that.
I got.
Sounds like
I had a lot of respect for him. Now I've got so much more respect for Chris Rock.
Did Neil
I
Brennan
don't-
have 3 mics set up for that interview?
No, but
You
they
had to
referenced the
had at
show.
least 2. What's that, Rick?
They did reference the show. That there was a review of the show that Brennan didn't like.
Mm.
And they had
See,
a
that's what-
conversation similar
that's-
to this.
That's where it all
that's
comes
what
back
binds
here.
us all together. The common ingredient. What do they call it? The genetic. What Hera Agathon is her in Battlestar Galactica.
That's the
the-
through line.
Ancestral.
the missing link,
No,
the first ancestor,
Yeah, but I'm not saying it
something
right.
that we don't know.
Something I don't know certainly, but it's
Greatest
the
common ancestor.
whatever. I'm already.
No,
done with
Danny,
it.
come on, come up with
I
it.
can't even find-
Work on it. You can do it. I
Danny's
believe
coming
you.
down
Come
off the
on,
hill
be
again, but-
fun, pink shirt wearing Danny. What's this sulking Danny?
You know,
Danny
he's-
crashing.
That's the. Hey, now that's a show.
Now,
You think he got mad at the reviews for that show? Because there were some mean ones.
Danny Hatch plays Pete Holmes.
Oh, I would
Uh,
love to. We look a lot alike, and we have a sort of similar sensibility.
And religious background.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're
Yeah.
both. Yeah, that's right on.
For me, it was a religious front ground. Those priests didn't care for my backside.
Whoa, Danny.
What? Who said
Whoa,
that?
Danny.
Hey, it's
Ah.
me. Fuck you,
Um,
Danny.
So now,
Canny. We're trying to do more character work.
oh, that's
This
Canny
leads
Hatch?
me to my Canny Hatch. This leads me to my next point. Eli is leaving the show soon.
Really?
We talked about it. He's it's always nice to meet a fan. Thanks for listening. We talked about it in the episode before the one you reviewed. Eli is moving on to So's Wild Oats and Greener Pastures. So the show is going to need a new co-host. We did bring you on as a secret audition, Mike.
Hmm.
There's going to be a lot of changes to the show. More characters like Canny Hatch, maybe a new co-host. So what I would like to extend to you, Mike, is a callback.
I would love to do a callback.
Great. How's next week work for you?
I think next week works well. I'm open at this time.
I'll have Canny pencil it in.
That sounds great.
See, what's
I'm-
funny is that my assistants mean to me just like I'm mean to Rick.
Here, and if I may now say
Fuck you,
something
fat
that
ass. Hey, Canny. Jeez.
now I feel like there's sometimes when there are comedians who are like what. I was on a show with Judy Gold sometime
Mm.
last year.
She wrote a book about how comedians should be able to say anything.
It's true.
Made
I have
Rick
that book as well.
made Rick almost throw up just now.
And after my set, she said that I was funny. And I said, "Thank you. That's very nice of you to say." And she said, "What's nice? It's true." And I thought that was funny, and also I didn't argue with her, but I'm like, even if it's true, if saying a nice thing is true, it's nice to say that nice thing. It's like the flip side of if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. If you
Start
do
a
have something
podcast.
nice to say and you do say it, even if it's true, it's nice. And so here's the thing that I'm going to say that I think is true that
Wow.
might not be nice, but I want to be nice to you, Danny, because you expected me to come here and say things that might not have been nice, and I'm about to deliver. Are you ready?
Very nice. High five, right? Borat
Yeah,
2.
exactly.
Play the
Danny,
character Borat 2.
that's my favorite thing that you do.
Only Borat from the second movie. My daughter Tutar.
Man,
Okay,
imagine
please.
there are people alive today
Uh-huh.
who weren't
I've
alive,
never seen Borat 2.
who might have only seen Borat 2 and not
Mhm.
Borat 1.
They're missing out on the mythos.
Ah.
Ah.
So here's the thing that I want to go back to
Shinquay.
is Anthony Massa's criticism of your criticism of Rick, of your meanness to Rick, of this show's
which I
meanness to
could
Rick.
not agree more with.
Oh, I understand. And here's the thing, is it's so funny. So my grandmother, there's a thing, there's a thing that has been said, like, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And there's a thing that I love, maybe I've shared this with you, from the show Justified, where the main character says, like, if you meet an asshole in the morning, you met one asshole, but if you meet assholes all day, you're the asshole. And so, like, we project. I love that so much. It's really great. It's sort of like with comedians and audiences, like, if one audience is bad, it could be the audience that's bad. But if every audience is bad, it might not be the audience that's bad.
What do they have in common?
Exactly. And so my grandmother said once, like, she would a blue no matter who. She's like, I vote all Democrats, even the bad ones. And so she would say about Trump, she would say he is an asshole and a name caller. And I'd always be like, hold on a second. Because she was in that moment, certainly, at least she's calling him a name caller, which is calling someone a name. So she is being a name caller. So the thing that she's leveling against him is true of herself. And now I'm also being a name caller of her and of him. And that's why it's in some ways difficult to get out of this kind of thing. But to bring it back to the idea of the Muckville podcast.
Whoa, I just got a news alert. Donald Trump died. He killed himself because Mike's grandma.
That can't be the truth.
He tried to eat a ballot and it choked on it.
Danny! He tried to eat a ballot.
What, was he able to process it?
He said, count this, asshole.
That is very funny.
And then your grandma was like, that is one asshole. Asshole counted.
Oh, God. So, Danny,
No,
I'm
sober
trying,
as a bird. Yes, please. I'm trying to
be
listen.
nice to you and do what you want,
You're
but you
nailing
keep
the
doing what you
audish.
want.
Yes. Well, it's the line you're gonna have to straddle as potentially the new co-host of the podcast.
Oh yeah, it's so funny
You have
that
to go
that the critique from Muckville of this podcast is that you are being mean to somebody else.
Well, look, it takes one to know one.
I mean,
Game recognized game.
Yeah.
It takes one
That's
to
right. That's
often.
absolutely right, Eli.
Here's the game does recognize game, but I
can't
think
deny
it's
it.
honestly, isn't it more like it takes one sometimes to not know one? Like it takes somebody being like, hey, you're being mean. Stop being mean to that person on your podcast, says the Mean Comedy Podcast. Like, it's the ultimate black kettle. It's ridiculous.
It might be the hero we need.
My review of Anthony Massa's Muckville is it's ridiculous, and not in the way that he wants to be ridiculous. He is being a different kind of ridiculous that I would encourage him to be.
This might be the most devastating review of Muckville Radio I think he'll ever experience.
Mike, if
It's
you've
perfect.
got 8 or
Take
9
that.
hours to carve out, you should be a guest on his next episode.
Oh, I don't think so. I've got too much Comedy Studio podcast co-hosting to do.
Well, you've got a callback. Let's
Yeah,
not
I've got too much
get ahead
being
of
called back to the
ourselves.
Comedy Studio podcast.
It has piqued my interest. I'm going to go listen to some of Anthony's.
No,
Yeah,
Rick,
just in
that's
time
not,
for us to talk about it on the podcast.
that's not what I wanted. Only listen to the few moments where he talks about me.
It's nestled in the middle of that episode. You're gonna have to do some. You're gonna have to put on your pith helmet and do some safari scavenging to find it.
It takes a little bit to get there. There are a lot of music breaks and bong breaks, and he actually breaks his bong, and he takes a lot of shots before
if
he
I
gets to
may,
that part.
Yeah,
Does
it took a
that
lot
mean
of
we're
shots
up
at
to-
me and my friend Mike.
It's
Does that
true.
mean we're up to recommendations?
If Mike
guess
is done fucking running his mouth.
I want to run my mouth one more time, if I may.
It's
and I-
always the running of the bullshit with you, isn't it?
yes.
That's a callback to my album.
Oh, that's my callback.
Yes.
So there's an article that Matt Ruby, a comedian friend, shared with me called "Why Facts Don't Change Our Minds" by James Clear, and I really like this article. Recommended James Clear. This is not my recommendation. This is still just part of the show, but part of it is that facts don't change our minds, friendship does. So I'm trying to become friends with Anthony Massa to change his mind. But there is the idea that, like, you know how sometimes people, if you put a negative comment on somebody's YouTube video, it still helps the algorithm make more people find that YouTube video. Like, if you really want somebody to not be helped, then ignore them. And so there's a part of this article that says why false ideas persist. There's a reason that bad ideas continue to live on, which is that people continue to talk about them. Silence is death for any idea. Ideas can only be remembered when they're repeated, and people also repeat bad ideas when they complain about them. Like if you're quote tweeting somebody to yell at them on Twitter, you are helping them. You are helping more people see what they have said.
It's a dirty trick.
The more you repeat a bad idea, the more likely people are to believe it, it says in the article. So it says, your time is better spent championing good ideas than tearing down bad ones. Don't waste time explaining why bad ideas are bad. You are simply fanning the flame of ignorance and stupidity. And that's what I've come here to do today, is fan the flame of ignorance and stupidity, but also to celebrate and champion the Comedy Studio podcast, which I love very much.
Now that is what we're here to do.
Well done.
And we can't wait to destroy your love.
I
of it
do
by
agree with that
potentially making you a
100%
co-host.
though.
Haha.
I've noticed I've really have made a habit of destroying things I love by making them part of my profession. Used to love comedy. Used to love podcasts. Used to love one specific podcast.
That's something I'm really
just-
struggling with.
Yeah,
is
it's tough.
for 15, 20 years, the Comedy Studio was nothing but volunteers. And now it's got to be a business. And I really
Yeah,
struggle with how
typically
I
how
keep
labor
people
law
as
works.
enthused as I am.
All right, well, that
I understand.
is a
Have you guys?
fucking
Oh,
note to
I
end
know what
on.
my recommendation will be.
Great. It's
Okay.
time for comedy recommendations. Blah, 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 blah.
Is it time for my recommendation?
We always start with Rick.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. For the business, I'm going to go with Aeronaut Brewery over at 14 Tyler Street. One of those little local breweries that's sort of off the corner, so you might not even think of them, but perfect for little gifts, and they're open from noon until 10 every day. Cool little thing. I've got so many comedy things. Vanyaland did their 20 best comedy LPs, which includes Andrew
Andrew
Mayer.
Mayer
and-
recorded at the studio, and that's
Yeah,
all the names we
all
need to
sorts of
mention
stuff.
from that article.
And if one jumps out, I would say
Nori
Baratunde
Davis.
Thursday, our old friend, is one of 12 best podcasts on Apple.
What?
Yeah, so
Who said this?
Baratunde's How to Citizen is a really
Another
good podcast, and
podcast.
definitely worth your thing. Baratunde actually wrote the very first Yelp review of the Comedy Studio.
What did it say?
Wow. I
How many
like that.
stars?
So those would be my 5. Those would be my recommendations.
All right, Mike. What do you got? If you've got to say something.
Well, I don't have to. I'll take my critique. But the first comedy recommendation I would say is Sarah Benincasa's book, Real Artists Have Day Jobs. That essay
She's
is
great.
kind of all about the idea that, I think we all know people who, like, the goal of making comedy the profession, is such that you might be like, okay, well, I'll live in a box then and not eat anything. And like, to have the title, I'm a full-time comedian. But it can be better to, if you have to, or if you want to, have another revenue source so that you can love the comedy that you're doing that eventually maybe will prove itself. Once it, like, I stopped having other jobs once I made enough money in a year of comedy to sustain me for a year. I was like, now that I have enough I made enough money this year, and if I make that much money next year, like, I was optimistic that it would keep happening, but I was like, I will become a barista again if I need to, because I know that I need money for rent and food.
Yes, but you also had a unique situation in that you were getting your master's in linguistics from BU, so you also had academia to fall back on.
I did have that, but that was never my plan. Like, my plan was actually to be a resident assistant and not have to pay rent while I was at BU getting a graduate degree. But because I was mainly just interested in going out at night and doing comedy.
Right.
And it was, in fact, I moved to New York in 2008, which was basically the year that I stopped having all the jobs that I had in Boston, including the resident assistant job. and I almost didn't get the degree because I wanted to just be a comedian, and now I was a comedian. But my advisor was like, come on, just write this paper. And I was like, fine, I'll write the paper. So I don't specifically have an interest in, if academia comes calling me to do it, then maybe I would do it. But comedy, like, there's never been a specific backup plan in mind.
Yeah, I'm just saying academia sort of gave you a little break from the all or nothing decision of, am I going to be an artist and starve, or am I going to sell out and survive? You had a little bit of like, okay, I've got the rent covered. Now I can go out at night and do this other thing that I want to.
It's true. I recommend to anyone, if you can, become a resident assistant at a university. That will cover your rent while you also work as a barista to get some money to pay for food, and then also go out and do comedy at night. Having flexible hours, having a flexible job is probably the most helpful thing when starting out, when you need to have a job that isn't comedy. But I also love your recommendations, Rick. Baratunde is super. His podcast is super. His books are super. He called me on the phone the other day. Our conversation was super.
Very smart guy.
And I'll do it for my local business. Does anyone ever say the Comedy Studio? That's that's a local business in Boston that I recommend.
Yeah, for now.
But also I'll say, and it's local everywhere on the internet. The one that I say every week, my friend Shelley's letterpress business, where you can get, at perfect time now, greeting cards for the holidays, for the new year, for anything, any of your greeting card and otherwise other things needs at Albertine Press. Albertine Press is in Cambridge, and I don't even send people cards anymore. I just order cards from there, and her handwriting is way better than mine, and and now people think that I moved to Cambridge because they're getting holiday cards from Cambridge.
Lovely.
Albertine Press.
For my local business, of
.com.
course. Are we finished? May I have the floor, please?
Albertine Press.
They paid for a 60-second spot, so they actually have 12 more seconds.
You got it. Okay. Albertine Press.
AlbertinePress.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd like to recommend, of course, for my local business, Narragansett Brewery. It's smart juice for the good podcasts.
Fuel for your podcast.
Now, no, I believe it's smart juice. That's the one that can. Now, who here, for my comedy recommendation, who here is familiar with the trolley problem? I assume
I'm
we all
familiar.
are.
Oh
Yes.
yeah, I know the trolley problem.
So yesterday I saw a very funny image illustrating the trolley problem, but starring the characters from Magic School Bus, and I'm gonna see if you guys can see that there. It's Miss Frizzle, and she's controlling the lever, and on one track is Arnold, the most annoying one, and on the other track is everyone else. And then you can see in the bus is the little lizard, and the bus is also saying "Wahoo!" And I saw this image last night, and I swear to you, I must have laughed for 5 minutes straight. I never do that anymore. Rosa was watching The Bachelorette. It was a particularly intense moment in The Bachelorette. She was like, "Why are you laughing at this?" And I said, "Honey, it's because of the Magic Bus trolley problem." And so that is what I recommend: being high on the internet while
Danny,
your partner watches The Bachelorette.
Danny,
Memes,
that's
they're funny.
wonderful, and you've reminded me. I'm sorry. I know my time is up, but
No, please.
I just want another comedy recommendation.
Okay.
In the past couple weeks, my friend Emily Flake, who is a New Yorker cartoonist and otherwise cartoonist, who I recommend, she recommended to me a New Yorker cartoonist named Will McPhail, McPhail. He's on Instagram. You can go to willmcphail.com. His comics are so they really, I'd never seen them before, and I just spent so long scrolling through them, and I think they're beautiful to look at, and the ideas are so on point. So
Like
enjoy
Foxtrot.
Will McPhail.
You
What's
ever
that,
read-
Danny?
You ever read Foxtrot?
Oh, I loved Foxtrot. This is different.
Okay.
Matt Diffie writes for the New Yorker cartoonist, and on my birthday decades ago, he did his first cartoon in the New Yorker was a secretary saying to a salesman who's trying to get in to see the boss, "I'm sorry, Mr. Jenkins just doesn't like you." And he said that was his feeling whenever he would call me for dates.
I love that, Matt Diffie.
And yet you
Yeah, he's
complain
great.
about everyone being mean to you. Interesting. Okay, Eli, take us home. We've been out of doors
Alright.
for long enough. It's time to put our masks on and head back inside.
Getting
What?
too rowdy on this podcast. That pink shirt really brings it out of you, Danny.
Yeah, I'm a whole new man.
Oh, love that pink shirt. That's my
Love it.
local
love
business.
that pink shirt on Danny.
So my local business recommendation, I'm going to give a shout out to my good friend Jose and his Twitch channel, Wyasmic. That's WHYASMEK. He's a very good friend of mine. He is also a incredibly talented graphic designer. He has a lot of videos of him sped up videos of him creating logos and graphic designs on his channel when he's not gaming. So it's very impressive stuff, and he does a lot of good work. So I want to give him a shout out.
Yeah. Would we have to go to Twitch to that, or
I'll link it right now.
Just a URL?
You can, if you just Google Wyasmic, you'll find him.
Okay.
Twitch is different from Twitter, right?
Very different.
Danny?
Yes.
Okay.
What about Twitcher?
So, yes. What about the Twitcher series starring Henry Cavill?
Eli has
The Twitcher. I mean, nothing compares to the greatest actor of all time, Henry Cavill. Right.
He's my Superman.
Danny, just real quick clarification.
Yeah,
Is that a
please.
joke about the show Witcher? Is that the
Yeah.
name of a show?
Yes.
I didn't know enough, but you
Guru
made me
like.
smart.
Yes, you are. He's so much like Gru.
You complete my Witcher
He's got three
knowledge.
adorable little daughters, and
You
he's in
had
love
me
with,
at stop talking about Gru.
He's in love with Kristen Wiig.
I've never seen it.
Really? Well,
Would you
he's-
recommend I
he's-
watch that first or Click?
He's friends with the Minions.
You
Click.
should watch them back to back.
Yeah, actually, yeah. If you put one on your record player and you watch one, they.
Oh,
sync
like
up
Dark Side of
perfectly.
Click?
Yeah, Dark Side of the Gru.
Good, Danny.
Very good, Danny.
That's a good Danny.
So far, you're nailing your audition.
Ha 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 ha.
Just say good Danny over and over again, and you get a good
Okay,
audition.
Eli, we've fucked around for long enough.
Oh, okay. And my comedy recommendation, I went back, into the old YouTube archives. Do you remember the old Harry Partridge cartoons?
Numa Numa. Harry Partridge. I'm not sure.
He's a very talented independent animator who made a bunch of YouTube series that are very funny, but they're like very old.
Did he do Charlie the Unicorn?
No. I'll find him on YouTube. But he was like, if you just look up Harry Partridge, you'll find him, and his animations are like very impressive for the day, and they're impressive now. But like he did it all himself.
Wow.
And I think he got some work out of it.
Hey, I got another one I want to recommend. It's Matt Shore. He does the podcast music now, and he also does DJing for our comedy studio shows, and he's really good. So
Matt Shore is very good.
He's not the South Shore. He's the Matt Shore. You're looking up the cartoon,
Yep.
Mike. Now,
There
if
we go.
you were taking this audition seriously, you would be filling up this.
Oh, I was
Empty
taking
air.
the critique to heart. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Here's a joke that I wrote about thinking about going on a silent retreat.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of good things about them. So the stage that I'm at right now is I'm talking a lot about thinking a lot about going on a silent retreat.
Nice. I'm sorry, I was distracted by this website, Eli.
I
put in
understand.
chat that I think has given my computer a stroke.
Oh,
That'll do it. That was the whole point. That was
well,
the whole point all the
gentlemen.
time. The ultimate meanness.
Danny, do you want me to take my joke again and you can laugh at it like you're supposed to?
Yeah.
Perfect. That'll do. I'll take just edit that laugh in.
Gentlemen, it's been an honor as this ship sinks slowly into the Atlantic. As we play on into the night, God save the Queen. Was that one of the songs they did on Titanic? I don't know. I was too distracted by Leo's abs to pay attention to any of the peripheral stuff. Thank you for joining us, Mike. The invitation is extended if you want to join us next week for your callback.
I look forward to it.
Good. Where can we find you, Rick?
Oh, that's nice of you to ask. At Mike Kaplan, spelled the way I spell it.
I asked Rick where we could find him.
Oh, really?
I did.
You would dare
Oh.
do such a thing, Danny?
Yeah. Yeah. Where can we find you?
I'm sorry, Rick,
TheComedyStudio.com. Still got shows.
And the phone has rung a
And the
third
phone
time,
calls.
much like the proverbial cock from the Bible has crowed a third time.
We are busy here at the Comedy Studio offices.
Mike, where can we find you?
Thank you for asking. You can find me at thecomedystudio.com on December 24th, where I'll be
Ah.
part
Oh,
of
yeah?
The choking
Jews
show.
on Christmas Eve show.
Now, what? How is that? You guys are all just going to get up on stage and choke? I just don't understand what the choking show is.
I also don't know what you're referring to.
Well, the show you're on, it's called The Choking Show.
Oh, I don't think that.
Hosted by Dan Crone, The Choking Show. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I guess I also don't. I gotta look into that.
Yeah.
But also you can find me online at the various places where you put in my name, Mike Kaplan. And I don't know if you heard that there was this Vanyaland 20 albums that they recommend from
All
this
right,
year.
thanks so much, everyone. It's
Wait,
been a
but
blast.
I just wanted to let you know that Nori Davis's album is good.
Mhm,
And
it
so
is
is,
all on
And
Zoom,
Mike
right?
Kaplan's AKA.
Oh,
And Mike Kaplan's podcast with Micah Sherman. They spend the first 10 minutes talking about what me saying thank you to them meant to them.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
So
Must have
that's
been a real treat.
Broccoli and Ice Cream.
Thank you.
My other podcast. I've got Broccoli and Ice Cream. I've got The Faucet, and I've got coming soon, the Comedy Studio Podcast.
Well, we'll see how next week goes.
Coming
Eli,
next week.
Eli's got to sign off on you. That's
understood.
You've got to impress him.
Training his replacement.
I think you've got it all covered.
Evaluating it. Well, let's see what we think next week.
After this legendary callback that we're going to see.
This has been
The
one
greatest
of our
callback
episodes.
ever done.
Of course, in tribute to Anthony Massa, it's been rambling and unfocused and borderline unlistenable. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good night. We'll talk to you next week. Mike, take it away.
Thanks and bye.
Thanks and bye.
Rick, take it away.
Thank you very much.
Ooh, pizza's here.